Okay, this is part two of a three-part video series talking about GKR Calendar. And what we're going to do in this video is walk through the various screens of the application and tell you how to set up the calendar and the parameters and get going. And again, just as a reminder, this application is for therapists or professionals who see clients on a calendar scheduled basis and want to export the session information and the payment information to an Excel spreadsheet. And in particular, it will format the data specifically for Transaction Pro Importer, which will input the data into QuickBooks Online without any intervention. So let's start with delete and reload. And delete and reload, you have to enter a security code. Now, it's really not a secret code. It's 1030. And we just use this code to make sure you don't click on the screen accidentally and delete your calendar. But once you've dialed in 1030, we can delete calendar. Takes just a second, and the calendar has been successfully deleted. We could also delete the clients, but I won't do that at this time. And then let's go to the way you would normally start this application. And the first thing we would do is, well, let's just take a quick look at About. And when you do go out to the App Store, you're looking for version 4.6. And this just tells you a little bit about when the application was created. And the help screen. Not particularly well formatted, but it's a list of just about all the information we're going to be discussing in this video. And then to actually get started, we would go to the screen that talks about calendar parameters. Now, calendar parameters are where you define which days of the week you work or see patients or clients. And in this case, we're just going to say that we see patients on Mondays. And we start seeing sessions at, let's say, 9:15 in the morning. So we'd hit the start time. And we see our last patient around 12 o'clock p.m. And that's our end time. And let's say that we see people for 60 minutes with a 15-minute break. So that would be an hour and 15 minutes between sessions, and we click on session, set session, and break duration. And now we know the days of the week, start time, end time, and how long each session, including break, is going to be. Click on save, and that saves the parameters when we want to add days to the calendar. So next, we're just going to go ahead and, well, before we add days, let me show you what it looks like for the default email and codes. Whenever you do an export, it sends an attachment via an email wherever you'd like, and that becomes your exported data. And what we have here is a default email address, and right now it's set to hxmiller@me.com. There's an I code and a C code. Right now we've set this at individual and couples. All three of these values can be changed. And just go ahead and save that. And that becomes our default codes for the system. Now we need to add days to our calendar, because if you look, let's quickly look at the calendar. You can see the calendar is completely empty. So now we want to add days. Now, what the system will do is it will either add a particular date for a non-work day, or it adds all work days. Now, what it does is it adds all days up until the date specified in this picker list here. So this would add all days up until November 3rd, 2017. And it starts with either early November 2015, if there's nothing in the calendar, or it starts with the last work day that's in the calendar. It just adds more days to whatever date is specified in the list. So let's go ahead and add all the days until December 30th, 2015. Click on Add All Workdays, and that adds 8 days to the calendar. Now, if we wanted to add just one day to the calendar, we could pick a date and just say Add Date. And that adds that one date. Now, only add it if it's a non-work day. Otherwise, it needs to be added through the Add All Workdays. So let's go take a look at what our calendar looks like now. And here is November 9th, November 16th. Oh, there's our Thursday, November 26th, the one day we added. And here's all the other Mondays. We only see patients 4 times a day, 1 day a week. It's a nice work schedule. But we added Thursday, November 26th, because we were going to see some patients perhaps on that day. Next, we're going to go take a look at Edit Clients. Edit Clients is a list of all the clients that you've added to the system. If you wanted to delete one, you click on Edit, and then you've got the Delete option. Or you could click on the plus sign, and you would have an Add option where you could add a new client, set the code to either I or C, and set their standard rate per session to whatever amount you would like. Excuse me. And when you click Add on this or Change, it's not only going to excuse me, add or change the client to the client list, but it's also going to go and make any changes necessary to all of the sessions in the calendar. So if you've been seeing somebody for a couple of months and you had been spelling their last name incorrectly, you could change it here, hit save or hit update, and that will go in and redo all the spelling everywhere that client exists in the calendar. Now, when you do add, change, or delete a client, let's just go ahead and add Jim as a new client. Excuse me. Let's go add Jim with a rate of, a code of C and a rate of 200. When we add this, it's going to create an email that it's going to send to the default email address telling us that Jim has been added to the calendar with a rate of 200 and a code of C. The purpose of this email is so that you can send this to yourself or to your accountant or to your bookkeeper so that they know you've made a change to the client list in case they want to make any updates to your accounting system. Now I'm just going to cancel this out. No need to send that email and go back. But Jim has been added to the client list. After client list, let's now go take a look at our calendar. So now we can start to make entries into our calendar. If we want to schedule a client at 9:15 on November 9th, just touch on that row. Up pops the blank session where we can scroll to the client for the session. The name automatically appears in the top, indicating that that's going to be scheduled, and that's all there is to it. If Jim calls up just before the session and says he can't make it, we can type in missed, and that will indicate to the accounting system. We're going to put a little note in there that says missed without 24 hours notice, but they can still get billed. If he gave us plenty of notice and a good reason, we can change it to canceled and change his rate to 0. If he actually comes into the session but gave us a check or cash, and his session was $125, and we type in a check number of 1234, and he gives us a check for $125. And now you can see in the accounts payable field, his name is there. We have the check amount. Oh, let's change the check date to 2015, and he's saved. Now, let's say he actually gives us a check for $225. No, I didn't mean to do that. His rate was $125, but he gives us a check for $225. Well, now that we have an account that he's paying to and a check number and a check date and a check amount, we also have the option of splitting the payment because he gave us more money than he owes us for this session. So maybe what he intended to do was pay $100 for a friend of his and $125 for himself. Where's Jim for himself? So of that $225 that he gave us, $100 is going to Annie, $125 for himself. Can hit save, and you'll notice that in the payable account field, it now says split payable, meaning that there is some additional information on how that check for $225 is to be split across accounts. And that's it. A couple of other little things. Let's go back and let's say that we want to see a friend. Our friend is not in our accounting system, but I want to put it in the calendar so I know not to book anybody else for this time. But I don't want this record going to the accounting system. It's not really a business meeting. So I click on No Load, and that indicates to the extract components of the system that this record is not to be or no loaded to the accounting system. One last thing, let's go ahead and schedule a meeting on November 16th. And before I go ahead and book this for somebody, it tells me that Jim has had this session in the past 4 weeks. Now that will go away as soon as I type in any name, but that's a little note reminder so we don't wind up giving away a session to a preferred customer. So that is pretty much the functionality of the calendar. Just touch on a row to, well, it wasn't really Ruth I wanted, it was Annie. Now it's going to warn me that the client has been changed, all other information will be reset. This is so you don't go into a calendar, scroll the bar by accident. I didn't really want, so I can hit cancel, and it brings it back to who it was. And that's the calendar system. Next, we'll take a quick look at search. Just type in Jim or Jay, and that shows us all the activity that Jim has in the calendar and some information that he did have a C session for $125. He gave us cash, but there's actually a split payment record for the $225. And just cancel to return and the menu button, and that's the search. The last thing to do is to do an export. Now we can either export the entire calendar to an Excel spreadsheet. Just type on export, and it creates an email to the default address with the attachment being the CVS file, which is a comma separated value, which is the perfect format for any commercial spreadsheet. And that sends an email that I can then use for saving or manipulating. And we'll talk more about that in the next video. I don't need to send this, so I hit delete that email. I can export clients. Works the same way. It sends an email with a attachment of all of the clients. I'm going to cancel out of that email. Now, for my monthly accounting, I can set a month. And I just want to export the receivables records, all the money that I received. And this will be in a format for Transaction Pro Importer, which you can then use for QuickBooks Online. And once we've set the date, the month, and the year, the buttons at the bottom become enabled, and I can export the receivables. Again, it creates an email with the list of receivables for that month, and I could send that to myself or delete it, and I could export the invoices with that same month accounting period. Another email is created. Cancel out of that. And that's export. And now I'm back to the main functions of the application. So in the next video, I'm going to explain how you would use those exported files and what you can do with them. But for the extent of the application, you want to come in, set up your calendar parameters, set up your default email and codes, add your days, edit in your new clients, and then start using the calendar. Search as necessary to find a client's activity, and then export, as we can then talk about those exported files in the next video. And that is GKR Calendar.